Hello, everybody, and good evening or good morning, depending on where in the world you're dialing in from. We are super excited to have all of you join us today. Over the next few minutes, we'll have more people filtering in, but for those of you who are here right on time, we will get started immediately, and we will jump right in. We're really excited today. I think most of us have met, but quick introduction. I'm Ross Overline, the CEO and co-founder of Scholars of Finance, and I'll be your host today. First and foremost, thank you all for joining us for this week's National Speaker Series. We're happy to see all of you here, and a very warm welcome to everyone at our chapters across the country. We've been inspired watching our community develop and grow in light of all the recent changes caused by COVID-19 and on all of our lives. Many of you have mentioned that because of that, you hope to have some skills-based workshops. And some people have also mentioned they've been really distracted recently or having difficulty being productive, being stuck at home in the same place at all times as we're on lockdown in many states and many countries. So this week, we are really pleased to have my friend Nir Eyal as our distinguished guest on the Scholars of Finance National Speaker Series. Nir is a renowned behavioral psychologist and a New York Times bestselling author. Most recently, he published a book on how to manage distractions, stay focused, and be highly productive. That book is called Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, and will teach us the secret of finally doing what we say we will do with a 4-step research-backed model, and reveal the key to getting the best out of technology without letting it get the best of us. I've known Nir for a couple of years now, and even had the privilege of getting to know him and help provide some feedback on this book. If you don't have a copy of Indistractable, I would highly recommend you get it on Amazon or Audible. It's available in a number of venues online. And I can tell you, in reviewing the manuscript, I tested this personally. I tested the system and had incredible results. So I would highly recommend it, and we'll learn some of the basics today. So with that, we'll be hearing from Nir for the first 35-40 minutes of the show today, and then we'll move into a Q&A session as usual. If you have a question that comes up, please raise your hand in Zoom or type your question in the chat. Once we shift into Q&A, you will be called on to introduce yourself, your name, where you're dialing in from, which chapter you're at, and ask your question. And with that, I will share a little bit more about Nir and then turn it over to him to get us started. So Nir Eyal writes, consults, and teaches about the intersection of psychology, technology, and business. The M.I.T. Technology Review dubbed Nir the prophet of habit-forming technology. Nir founded 2 tech companies since 2003 and has taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and at the Hasso Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford. In addition to this, Nir is also the author of 2 best-selling books, Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. Indistractable received critical acclaim, winning the 2019 Outstanding Works of Literature Award, the OWL, as well as being named one of the best business and leadership books of the year by Amazon and one of the best personal development books of the year by Audible. The Globe and Mail called Indistractable timely reading, a smart, thorough look at getting traction in a world of distractions, the best business book of 2019. In addition to blogging at nirandfar.com, Nir's writing has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, Time Magazine, and Psychology Today. And Nir is also an active investor and has some experience to share for all of us Scholars of Finance. He invests in habit-forming technologies. Some of his past investments include Eventbrite, Anchor.fm, Kahoot, Refresh.io, which was acquired by LinkedIn, Product Hunt, Marco Polo, Presence Learning, and several others. Nir attended the Stanford Graduate School of Business and Emory University. Needless to say, we are grateful to have Nir with us for an hour this evening. And with that said, per usual Scholars of Finance fashion, if everyone can please unmute your mic and give him a warm round of applause and a welcome as he joins us. Nir, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. This is great. I've never actually had that virtual applause, so that's awesome. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Can you just give me a quick confirmation here that you can see the opening Indistractable slide?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, Terrific. Great. Well, welcome everyone. It's so great to be here. And I just want to thank Ross. Ross, you were so instrumental in helping me refine what came into the final product of Indistractable, from reading the early manuscript to trying the techniques for yourself. You were one of my guinea pigs. And so I really appreciate the time and devotion to this project. And I'm so glad that it served you over the past few years as well. So thank you again. And thank you for inviting me. So today we want to talk about this struggle that so many of us have with controlling our attention and choosing our life. And that's the subtitle of my book, Indistractable. It's all about how to control your attention and choose your life. And what we've seen is that, if you thought the world was a distracting place before the COVID crisis, it's only become more so now, right? The world has somehow become even more distracting. And so when Ross told me that a few of you mentioned that you were struggling with this problem of, now that I have to work from home, how do I still do what I say I'm going to do? How do I make sure that I can stay productive? And so let me just back up for a moment and introduce myself and my background. I taught for many years at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and then later at the Hasso Plattner Institute of Design, where I taught the subject matter of my first book, which was called Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And this book came out about 6 years ago. And the idea behind my first book was to democratize the techniques behind what makes products like Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Snapchat. What is the secret psychology behind how these products are designed to get you hooked? But of course, I didn't write the book for those companies. They've known these techniques for years. I wrote this for everyone else. I wrote it for product designers, for businesses, for companies who can use the same exact psychology to build healthy habits in people's lives. And that's exactly what's happened over the past 6 years. Companies like Kahoot, the world's largest educational software, they just went public a few months ago. They use the hook model from day one to help kids get engaged into in-classroom learning. Companies like Fitbod help people get hooked to exercise. The New York Times, I've consulted with the New York Times, one of my past clients, to get people hooked to consuming news on the New York Times app. And so all sorts of companies and businesses can use these techniques to build good, healthy habits in our lives. But there's another side, that if we sometimes use products to build good habits, what about the ones that sometimes create these bad habits in our lives? And so I had an experience in my own life that made me reconsider my relationship with distraction a few years ago. I was with my daughter one afternoon, and we had this beautiful day planned, just some time for daddy and daughter to get together and just have some fun together. And we actually had this activity book that had various things that dads and daughters could do to get close to each other, build a paper airplane, have all these, activities that we could do. And one of the activities in the book was to ask each other this question: if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I wish I could tell you what my daughter's answer was, but at the time, I wasn't listening. Because in that moment, I decided that whatever was on my phone, I just had to check for one quick sec. And my daughter understood. She got the message that whatever was on my screen was more important than she was. By the time I looked up from my phone, she'd left the room and decided to play with some toy outside. And that's when I realized that I'd blown it. I'd blown this perfect daddy-daughter moment. And if I'm honest with you, this didn't just happen when I was with my daughter. It would happen when I was making plans to exercise and eat right, and yet I wouldn't. It would happen when I would sit down at my desk and say, I'm definitely going to start working on that big project, and yet find myself procrastinating 30, 45 minutes later. And so if you ask me today, what superpower would I most want? I would tell you that I would want the power to be indistractable. I think that becoming indistractable is the skill of the century, because there's no facet of our life that is not affected by our ability to control our attention, whether it's our physical health, our psychological well-being, our productivity at work. Everything relies upon our ability to sustain our attention. And those who are able to be indistractable will outperform those who allow their time and attention to be controlled and manipulated by other people. So what I want to talk about today is the 5 years of research I did to get down to the bottom of why we get distracted and how we can become indistractable. The first place to start is to realize that this is not a new problem. 2,500 years ago, the philosopher Plato described the problem of akrasia in the Greek, which means acting against our better judgment. And Plato wondered, why is it that despite knowing what we should do, why don't we just do it? Why do we do things against our better interest? So this is important to realize because, many people think that distractions came because of our iPhones and Facebook and Instagram, and nothing could be further from the truth. Distractions are part of the human condition, and we have always struggled with them. So how do we make sure that we don't get distracted? How do we make sure we do what we say we're going to do and finally live with personal integrity? Well, here's a model that I'd like to offer up. We have to understand what is distraction, and most importantly, what is the opposite of distraction? So most people, if you ask them, what's the opposite of distraction? They'll tell you the opposite of distraction is focus. But actually, I don't agree. You see, the opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. You see, if you look at the origin of both words, traction and distraction, they both come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And you'll notice as well that both words end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do, things that you are doing with intent, actions that help you live according to your values and be the kind of person you want to be. Now, the opposite of traction is distraction. Distraction is any action that pulls you away from what you plan to do, anything that you are not doing with intent, any action that pulls you away from becoming the kind of person you want to be and prevents you from living your life according to your values. So this is really important for 2 reasons. Number one, anything can become a distraction. What do you mean anything can become a distraction? Well, let me give you an example. This used to happen to me all the time. Let me know if this resonates with anyone. You'd sit down at your desk and you say, okay, this morning, I'm not going to procrastinate. I've got that big project I need to complete. I'm going to get to work. I'm going to finish that big project. Here I go. I'm not going to get distracted. Let me dive in. I'm about to start. But first, let me check email, right? Let me do that one quick to-do on my to-do list real quick to get that out of the way, to get me some momentum, right? And we think that that's helping us stay focused, that we're doing something work-related, right? Checking email, that's something I have to do anyway, right? That's a work-related task that I'm being productive, right? Wrong. You see, that is the most pernicious form of distraction. When we allow distraction to trick us, to fool us into believing that what we are working on is important when it's not. It's simply urgent. And when we do that, when we allow distraction to trick us, we end up prioritizing the urgent at the expense of the important. And that is toxic for our productivity and for our well-being. Because remember, anything that is not what you plan to do is by definition a distraction. Even the worky stuff, right? Even checking email, it feels like something we should do, but if it's not what you plan to do with your time, it is by definition a distraction. And the reason I say it's the most pernicious form of distraction is because, if you sit down at your desk at work and you're, playing Candy Crush or checking Facebook, well, that's pretty obvious that that's a distraction. That's not what you're supposed to be doing while you're supposed to be working. But if you're checking email instead of working on the big project, it doesn't feel like a distraction. It feels like it's something that's okay to do. But I argue it's not what you planned to do. It is just as much of a distraction as playing a video game at your desk at work. Now, just as I said, anything can be a distraction, I'd argue anything can be traction. So many times you hear people complaining about how, these social networks are melting our brains and we're all getting addicted and it's hijacking our brains and there's nothing we can do about it. And I argue that is rubbish. That is clickbait perpetuated by the media because the media is in competition with the tech companies. It's rubbish. It's not true. There's nothing wrong with playing video games. There's nothing wrong with watching Netflix. There's nothing wrong with doing any of this stuff as long as you do it on your schedule, not their schedule. So anything you plan to do with intent is traction. Remember, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. If you want to watch Netflix, if you want to play a video game, great, do it. But do it with intent on your schedule, not someone else's. Okay, so anything we plan to do is traction. Anything other than that is distraction. Now, what prompts us to take these two types of actions towards traction or distraction? Two things. We have two types of triggers. Now, the first kind of trigger is what we call an external trigger. Now, external triggers are what most people tend to blame when they get distracted, right? It's the beeps, the boops, the pings, the dings, the rings, all of these things in our outside environment that can lead us towards distraction. Now, that's what people tend to blame. They tend to blame, oh, I was trying to stay focused and then I got a phone call or I got an email. That's what we tend to blame. And we'll get back to those in a minute. But it turns out what I discovered in my 5 years of research working on Indistractable, what I discovered was that the number one source of distraction is not the external triggers. The number one source of distraction is what we call the internal triggers. Internal triggers are uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape. Now, these uncomfortable emotional states, these are triggers that begin from within us, not from outside, but from inside of us. Because if we are to answer Plato's 2,500-year-old question of why do we do things against our better interests, we have to actually start with a first principles type of question, not just why do we get distracted, but why do we do anything and everything? Ask yourself for a minute, what's the nature of human motivation? Why do we do what we do? Most people will tell you it's about carrots and sticks, the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. This is called Freud's pleasure principle. And neurologically, it's not true. It's a myth. That in fact, we do not do things for the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Everything you do for only one reason. It's not about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. It's about one thing, and that is the desire to escape discomfort. Everything you do is about a desire to escape discomfort. Even the pursuit of pleasure. Think about it. Craving, wanting, desire, lusting. There's a reason we say love hurts. Because wanting something is itself psychologically destabilizing. That itch of wanting to feel good, wanting to feel pleasure, is itself spurred by the desire to escape that discomfort. And so this is a fundamental principle that we have to understand. Of course, this is common sense when we think about our bodies, right? If this is called the homeostatic response. So physiologically, think about it for a minute. If you go outside and it's cold, the brain says, oh, this is uncomfortable, put on a jacket. If you walk back inside, now it's too hot. The brain says, this is uncomfortable, this is too hot, take off your coat. If you feel hunger pangs, you eat. And if you're full, oh, now you ate too much, that feels bad, you stop eating. So everything we do is about a desire to escape discomfort. Physiologically, this is common sense. The same holds true psychologically. When you're feeling lonely, where do you go? Check Facebook. When you're feeling uncertain, Google. When you're feeling bored, oh, we've got lots of solutions for that. We have YouTube and Pinterest and Reddit. Check the news, check stock prices, sports scores. All of these things cater to uncomfortable internal triggers. So here's the takeaway here. And this is why we have to start on our path to becoming indistractable. We have to start with these internal triggers. Listen carefully. Time management is pain management. Let me say that again. Time management is pain management. I spent years researching all of the tips and tricks and life hacks, and I will tell you, none of them, zero of them work if you first and foremost don't deal with this truth that all time management is pain management. Why? Because distraction is about escape from discomfort. It's an emotion regulation problem. It's not a character flaw. Many of us, we have these internal dialogues in our heads that tell us we have a short attention span. I'm lazy. I can't focus. What's wrong with me? No, nothing's wrong with you. Chances are there's nothing wrong with you. It's not a character flaw. It's simply the fact that you haven't learned the techniques to cope with this discomfort in a healthier way that leads you towards traction rather than distraction. Now, what do we do about this? Once we understand the fact that all time management is pain management, well, we really only have two choices. We can either fix the source of the problem, fix whatever it is that's causing us these internal triggers, a difficult family situation, an oppressive workplace culture, whatever it might be that's causing us these internal triggers. Or, part of being a grown-up is that we feel bad sometimes, and that's okay. You see, feeling bad is not bad. What we have to do is to learn techniques to cope with that discomfort that we can't fix. So how do we learn to cope with that discomfort? Let me give you a few very actionable tactics that you can use today to start mastering these internal triggers. The first step is pretty easy. Psychologists tell us that by simply noting the sensation, by literally taking a pen and writing down whatever it is that you're feeling, I'm feeling bored, lonesome, fearful, uncertain, whatever it might be, simply writing down that sensation is an incredibly empowering first step to start mastering it. But that's just step one. Step two is to get curious about that sensation, not contemptuous. You see, most people, when it comes to distraction, they tend to fall into one of two buckets. We have what we call the blamers and we have the shamers. The blamers, they say, oh, it's something outside of me. You see, it's my phone that got me distracted. It's Facebook, it's the news. Oh, I hear this all the time. It's the world these days, right? That's what's causing me to get distracted. And they blame things outside themselves. But of course, that's fruitless because you can't do anything about those things. Facebook and Netflix and the news and the modern world aren't going anywhere. You can't stop the hands of time. These things exist. So that's fruitless. The other extreme is what we call the shamer. The shamer doesn't blame things outside themselves. They shame themselves. They take it on the inside. They say, oh, you see, here I go again, getting distracted. I always do this. This is the kind of person I am. I'm not very good at this job. You see, I always get distracted. And they shame themselves they on the inside. And of course, that makes things worse. Why? Because we know that shame is a very uncomfortable sensation. And so the more shame we feel, the worse we feel. And the worse we feel, the more internal triggers, which means that we become more likely to seek escape. Guess with what? More distraction to take our minds off of that discomfort. So we don't want to be blamers. We don't want to be shamers. We want to be what we call claimers. Claimers claim responsibility not for their feelings. This is a really important point. Most people don't realize that you cannot control your urges and feelings. You have no control over your urges and feelings. What you can control is what you do in response to your feelings. You can't control that any more than you can control the urge to sneeze. When you have the urge to sneeze, you can't, unwind that urge. The urge is already there. Your only choice is to choose how to respond to that urge, to that feeling, to that internal trigger. When you feel the urge to sneeze, do you sneeze all over everyone and get them sick? Hopefully not. Hopefully you take out a tissue and you act responsibly by covering your face, right? So we can only choose how we respond to these internal triggers, not the fact that we feel them in the first place. So how we respond, hence the word responsibility, to choose how we respond to those sensations. So here's a technique that we can use in our efforts to choose how we respond. This is called surfing the urge. And it's just one out of many, many techniques that I talk about in the book, Indistractable. But I wanted to share this one with you because I found it to be very helpful. Surfing the urge acknowledges that these uncomfortable internal triggers, these sensations, they crest and then they subside, just like a wave. And so your job is to ride that wave like a surfer on a surfboard. When we feel these internal triggers, whether it's loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety, it feels like we're always going to feel that way. But of course, that's never the case. That if we learn tactics to cope with that discomfort and let that sensation arise, crest, and fall, we can master it and overcome it without giving in to unhealthy distractions. One technique that I use almost every single day is called the 10-minute rule. And I think you'll find this to be very, very effective. Here's how the 10-minute rule works. When you find yourself tempted with a distraction, so you said you were going to work on that big project, that school assignment, that big report, whatever it might be, what you're going to do next time is to simply tell yourself that you can give in to that distraction, right, in just 10 minutes, okay? Whether that distraction is eating that piece of chocolate cake you know you don't want to really eat, whether it's smoking that cigarette, whether it's checking social media, it doesn't matter what it is. You can give into it, full permission, in just 10 minutes. Now, for those 10 minutes, what I want you to do is one of two things. You can either get back to the task at hand, do whatever it is you said you were going to do, or if you're not capable of doing that, I want you to simply surf the urge, to just sit there with your feelings, with your sensations, and bring awareness to your body. Don't judge, don't be contemptuous, get curious. What is it that I'm experiencing right now? Why am I feeling this way? Just sit with that sensation for just a few minutes. And what you will find that by the time those 10 minutes are up, and many times I'll just set a timer. So I set a timer for 10 minutes. I'll put my phone down and I'll just sit with that sensation for just a bit. And what you will find 9 times out of 10, by the time those 10 minutes are up, that urge, that sensation has already crested and subsided, and you're back at work at whatever it is that you said you would do. Very powerful technique, 10-minute rule. Give it a try, see how it works out for you. Again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are dozens of other techniques that we can use to master those internal triggers. But for the sake of time, I want to move on to the next step of becoming indistractable. The second step to becoming indistractable is making time for traction, making time for traction. You see, there is one practice that in my 5 years of research, talking to hundreds of people, that I found was very black and white. That people who used this practice, 100% of them mastered their time. They were indistractable. Everyone else who didn't do this struggled with their time. They found that there was all kinds of things that they didn't finish at the end of the day, that they constantly were going from one thing to the next, and they didn't feel like they got the best out of their days. And that practice is actually quite simple. And it's been proven in hundreds of peer-reviewed studies to be one of the most effective things you can do to get more out of your day. And that practice is to simply keep a time-boxed calendar, a time-boxed calendar. You see, there's a fundamental truth here when it comes to distraction, that we are not allowed to call something a distraction by definition unless we know what we got distracted from. Let me make this point again. You cannot call something a distraction unless you know what you got distracted from. How can you say you got distracted if you didn't plan what it is you wanted to do? So that's the difference fundamentally from traction and distraction, is intent. So what does this look like? What does a time box calendar look like? It looks like this. It's simply the practice of 15 minutes a week, sitting down and planning out how you want to spend your time. Because if you don't plan your days, somebody else is going to plan them for you. Your boss, your spouse, your roommate, the news, whatever's happening on Twitter, somebody is going to eat up that time unless you decide for yourself in advance what it is you want to do with that time. If you don't plan on traction and make that traction a priority in your day by deciding in advance what is traction for you in your life, then everything is a distraction. So how do we make time for traction in our day? The first step is to plan the time, not the output. Let me just talk about this for a minute, because I think there's a very prevalent myth that's really hurting people these days. I know it hurt me for many, many years. And that is what I call the tyranny of the to-do list. I'm guessing many of you keep a to-do list. I did for many, many years, until I uncovered what's really going on with the to-do list and why to-do lists are hurting your productivity. Now, I know this is a sacred cow that many people think, well, to get things done, don't I have to make a to-do list? Isn't that what the productivity gurus tell us to do? And I'm here to tell you that for the vast majority of people, to-do lists backfire because most people do not use them correctly. What's the difference between someone who uses a to-do list correctly and someone who uses a to-do list incorrectly? The person who uses a to-do list incorrectly, like I used to do, I would keep everything on my to-do list, and I would keep all those items. And of course, everyone who's kept a to-do list knows that you never finish everything on your to-do list. And so I would have this big long list of to-dos. And when I wouldn't finish the things on the to-do list, I would just recycle them from one day to the next to the next. And what I didn't realize is that when you do that, you are reinforcing your identity as someone who can't be counted on, right? Because every day you say, oh, I didn't finish that, no big deal. I'll just do it tomorrow, and then tomorrow, and then the next day, and the next day. And what you're doing day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, is reinforcing to yourself that you don't get things done. Promises you make to yourself don't get fulfilled. And eventually we begin to accept that fact that that's okay. If I don't finish everything on my to-do list, that's all right. And then you've lost. The war has been waged and you lost it. Instead of keeping a to-do list, which is nothing more than a register of output, right? A to-do list is what you want to finish, what you want to complete. That's a register of output. But of course, you can't get output without input. What's the input for the output of what we want to do in our day? The input is two things, time and attention. That's it. But most people, the vast majority of people who keep a to-do list, don't think about the input. They only think about the output. So it becomes this magical list of things I wish I could accomplish. I just write them on my to-do list and somehow they're going to get done. That's rubbish. It doesn't work that way. If you have a list of output, you need the list of input. What's your list of input? Your calendar. So a to-do list should be very temporary. Everything that goes on your to-do list is something that immediately should go into your calendar. That's your input. And here's the thing, okay? When people keep a to-do list, they measure their productivity by what they finished. With a time box calendar, that's not the goal. The goal of a time box calendar is not to finish anything. Let me say that again. Do you hear what I said? The goal of a time box calendar is not to finish anything. What do you mean? How am I going to get my things done? Here's how it works. With a time box calendar, your only goal should be to work on what you said you would work on for as long as you said you would work on it without distraction. That's your only goal. Work on whatever it is you said you would work on for as long as you said you would without distraction. That's it. Why? Because when you do that, when you say, okay, I said I was going to check email for 30 minutes and I did it without distraction. I said I was going to work on that big project for an hour and I did so without distraction. It doesn't matter if you finish. What matters is that you are reinforcing your identity as someone who does what they say they're going to do. You said you were going to work on that task for as long as you said you would, and you did. You're indistractable. You live with personal integrity. That's the kind of self-image you want to reinforce. And here's the kicker. People who use that technique, people who use time boxing, are more productive at finishing things than people who use the old stupid to-do list technique. It's actually more effective at helping you finish tasks. Why? Because you're planning the input of your time. Very, very important insight. Now, the next thing we want to do is to make sure that we spend more of our time concentrating and less time communicating. You see, the vast majority of us, we work in jobs, or if you're a student as well, it doesn't matter, that have some element of responsive work and some element of what we call reflective work. Responsive work is work that requires you to respond to various things in your life, right? The emails, the meetings, the notifications, all that stuff is responsive work. Reflective work is work that requires your full focus and attention, right? That's where certain work has to be done only during reflective time. Now, the problem is if we don't set aside time for reflective work, the reactive work eats up our entire day because it's easy, right? Reactive work is relatively easy. Checking those quick emails, taking that phone call, having the meeting, that's stuff that just happens automatically. But if you're not careful and protect that reflective work time, it won't happen. It'll just get eaten up by all the reactive work. So what we have to do is to make sure that we have time in our day for that reflective work. And I'm going to give you, I know most people listening right now are college students. Let me give you a huge competitive advantage for your future careers. Okay, I'm going to tell you a secret that is going to make you more productive than 99% of the people out there. What I want you to do for the rest of your career is to make sure that you book time in your day to think. Most people out there, the vast majority of people out there, make no time to think. They're not thinking throughout their day. And so what they're doing, they're just going from their entire day reacting to stuff all day. It's the people who make time in their day to think that get ahead, because that is the only time that you can focus, that you can concentrate, that you can plan, that you can strategize. Reserve time in your schedule for that concentrative, reflective time in your day. It will give you a huge competitive advantage over everyone else in your field. Now, one of the reasons we need to reduce that time spent communicating is because all of that communicating, the pings, the dings, the rings, the emails, the notifications, they come coupled with what we call external triggers. Now, external triggers, as I mentioned, these are things in our environment that can lead us towards distraction. And there's, in fact, one profession where these external triggers are literally a matter of life and death. If I were to ask you, what are the 3 leading causes of death in the United States of America? Think for a minute. What are the 3 leading causes of death? I'll give you a hint. Number 1 is heart disease. Number 2 is cancer. Number 3, if it was a disease, believe it or not, would be medication errors, prescription mistakes, healthcare practitioners inside hospitals giving patients the wrong medication or the wrong dosage of medication while they are still in the hospital. 200,000 Americans every year are harmed when they are given the wrong medication. And this is a 100% preventable human error. Now, most hospitals in America believe, well, it's just the cost of doing business. What are we going to do, right? People make mistakes. Until a group of nurses at UCSF decided to figure out what is the cause of this problem? Why do nurses make so many mistakes when they're giving out medication? And it turns out the source of this problem is nothing more than distraction. That on average, when a nurse is dosing out medication, they are interrupted, this study found, 10 times per dosing round. And when they are interrupted, when somebody taps them on the shoulder and says, oh, I need to talk to you for a quick second, every time they're interrupted, they tend to make mistakes. And so this is where people are harmed because of this human error. And the real tragedy here is that the nurses don't even realize they've made the mistake. They don't realize how much worse their performance is when they are distracted. And of course, why do I tell you this story? Very few of you are in the healthcare profession. I tell you this story because many of us in our own lives, we think, oh, we're doing great, right? I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right at my job. Look, my grades look good. I'm doing fantastic. And we don't realize how much better we could do, how we are doing as well as we are, despite the fact that we get distracted in our day. Just as these nurses were doing all right, they don't realize that they were getting distracted and the terrible consequences that occurred as an effect of their distraction later on. So in the moment, they thought they were doing a great job. It wasn't until they came into work the next day that a colleague would say, did you know what you did to Mr. Smith? You almost killed him because you gave him the wrong medication. They didn't realize how their work was impacted by these distractions. So the good news is there's a happy ending to this story. And the happy ending is that these nurses figured out a way to reduce prescription mistakes by 88%. They almost eliminated this problem, and the solution is amazing. The solution wasn't a multi-million-dollar program. It wasn't a fancy new app. It was plastic vests. They used plastic vests that these nurses wore that told their colleagues that there was a drug round in progress. This is when I'm distributing medication. Do not disturb. Okay, it's written right there on their backs. This almost eliminated the problem. Now, why do I tell you this story? Because I think that we can learn from these nurses and integrate this lesson into our own lives. Here's how. You know, many of you, when you go off to work, you will be working in open office floor plans, right? Where you will see that the number one source of distraction, according to 80% of survey respondents, was the most distracting thing at work wasn't their phones, wasn't their computers, it was other people, particularly if they work in open floor plan offices. So here's the solution. We start using what we call a screen sign. So in every copy of Indistractable, there's a piece of cardstock that you pull out of your book you fold it into thirds, and you put it on your computer monitor. This is something you can do right now. If you have a dorm mate, or you live with other people, you can put this sign on your monitor, on your screen during your indistractable work time. Of course, you can do this in the workplace as well. And it tells your colleagues, okay, for that 1 hour, an hour and a half, whatever amount of time you need to do your focused, reflective work, that's time when you're not to be interrupted. And putting on headphones doesn't really work. Headphones keep out noise, but they're not really good at keeping out people. Because when people see you wearing headphones, they think, oh, you're just listening to a podcast or watching a YouTube video, and so they'll still bother you. So you want to make that message very explicitly clear that you are indistractable right now. Another thing we can do to hack back these external triggers is to use technology to hack back these external triggers. For example, everyone's phones today come with this feature called Do Not Disturb while driving. Do Not Disturb while driving works like this. You push one button, and if someone calls you during that reflective work time, that time when you're indistractable, if they call or text you, they will receive an automatically generated an automatically generated SMS that says, I'm indistractable at the moment. You can customize the message any way you want. I can't talk right now, but if this is urgent, text back the word urgent, okay? And if they type in the word urgent, and only if they type in that word, then the message will come through. You see, because many of us, we don't block off that time to do reflective work because we say, well, what if somebody needs to contact me? What if there's an emergency? My client needs me. My friends need me. My family needs me. What if somebody needs me? Well, typically, 99% of the time, they can wait 30 minutes. They can wait an hour. It's not that they need us. It's that we fear the internal triggers of us fearing they might need us. Well, here's the perfect way to set up a little barricade that if it really, really is urgent, oh my goodness, your house is on fire, you have to call me right away. Well, they'll text you with the word urgent, and now that message will come through. Now it will get through to you. I've used this technique for years. Nobody's ever texted me with the word urgent because they know, okay, well, in 30 minutes, an hour, he'll call me back. Another thing we can do is to clear out this digital clutter. I used to have a desktop that looked like this, right? All of these files and notifications, all this stuff on my desktop that researchers have found reduces our productivity. All these external triggers reduce our ability to concentrate and focus. We don't have to live like this. We can take all of those external triggers and tuck them away in a folder somewhere so that we don't have to constantly be distracted by them. Same goes for our phones. 2/3 of people with a smartphone never change their notification settings. What? 2/3 of people never take the 5 minutes to turn off those notifications, right? To clear up our phones so that we don't have constantly these pings and ding, these external triggers that can lead us off track. So what we can do instead is to hack back these external triggers by asking ourselves first and foremost this critical question. Is this trigger serving me, or am I serving it? If the external trigger is an alarm, a reminder that says, hey, now it's time for that meeting, now it's time for that to go work out, whatever it might be, that's great. It's leading you towards traction, what you plan to do. But if it's something that leads you away from what you plan to do, so when I was with my daughter and my phone pinged me, and now I was checking email as opposed to being fully present with someone I love very much, now it had led me to distraction. So the critical question here is that trigger serving you, or are you serving it? And if you are serving it, it's time to get rid of it. It's time to hack back that external trigger because we are not powerless here. There is nothing that Mark Zuckerberg can do if you turn off the notifications. It takes just seconds, and we don't need every constant stock alert and news alert and ping and ding from our friends on Instagram and Facebook. We can use those things. There's nothing wrong with them, but we need to use them on our schedule, not every time we get a notification. And then finally, we need to leave these distracting devices outside of meetings, whether it's in an office setting, whether it's with our friends. If we are going to be present in body, we have to also be present in mind. And so it's time to leave those distracting devices outside of our meetings as well. Finally, the last step to becoming indistractable is to prevent distraction with pacts. Now, this is the firewall, the last resort that we use to prevent ourselves from getting distracted. Here's how it works. The first recorded case of someone using a pre-commitment, a pact, comes to us from a story that's 2,500 years old, the story of the Odyssey, written by the philosopher Homer over 2,500 years ago. The Odyssey is the story of Ulysses, who has to sail his ship past the island of the Sirens, these magical creatures who sing this mythical song, this magical song that anyone who hears this song, any sailor who hears this song, crashes his ship onto the shore of the Sirens Island. Now, Ulysses knows that this is going to happen. And so he takes steps now to pre-commit. He makes a pact with himself and his crew to make sure he doesn't do something he'll later regret, that he doesn't succumb to the siren song. Now, what does he do? He tells his crew to put beeswax in their ears so they can't hear the siren song, and he instructs them to bind him to the mast of the ship. And he tells them, no matter what I do, no matter what I say, do not let me go. And guess what? The plan works. He's able to sail his ship past the island of the Sirens and return his crew and his ship safely home. Now, I hope this metaphor, you understand what this metaphor is. You are Ulysses. There's lots of distracting stuff out there. And of course, that could also be you there in the corner, dead on the shores of distraction, right? By succumbing to the siren song. So what can you do about this? How can you make what we call a Ulysses pact? Well, we can use technology to block out tech distraction. How do we do that? We can use, there's thousands of free tools out there. Here are two I use almost every single day. On my desktop, I use an app called Self-Control. So I have told Self-Control, there are certain websites I do not want access to when I'm doing my reflective work. So when I'm writing, when I'm working on a big project, don't let me access email. Don't let me access Google. Don't let me access Facebook during those times. I push one button and those sites are blocked for the times I set. Here's another great app called Forest. That's wonderful. It's a free app. Here's how Forest works. You dial in how much time you want to do focused work, and you hit a button that says plant. Now, when you hit plant on that app, this cute little virtual tree, you see that little virtual tree there? That virtual tree gets planted. And if you pick up your phone and do anything with it, the virtual tree dies. And you don't want to be a virtual tree murderer. So it reminds you, oh, nope, that's not what I want to do right now. I don't want to pick up my phone. I want to stay focused right now. I'm not going to kill the virtual tree. It's silly, right? It's just a little virtual tree. You would not believe how effective this is at keeping you on track because you've made a little pact with yourself. Another technique that you can use, whether it's in an office setting or whether you have a roommate or someone else that you can work with, if you can set up a time to find a focused friend, right? Simply working next to somebody who's also hard at work and staying focused on a task that they said they want to focus on without getting distracted by something else can be very effective. Now, I know many of us today are at home. We don't have access to a colleague. Maybe we work remotely. No problem. Technology to the rescue. You can use a site called FocusMate.com, which is a product I loved so much. I actually invested in this company. Here's how FocusMate works. You find a time when you want to do your focused reflective work. You sign up for that specific time. You see that calendar there on the left. You find someone who also has the same time that they want to hold. You pick that time. You go online at that time. You see a little video feed of them. You can see that on the right-hand side. This was a student in the Czech Republic who was a medical school student who was memorizing human anatomy. We say, okay, what are you working on? What are you working on? Great, go. And for the rest of that time period, you just have to stay focused and do your work. And just watching that other person in the corner of your screen also diligently hard at work, staying focused, is an incredibly good motivator to make a pact with someone else to stay focused on what you said you would. Now, this is the fourth and final step, is to make these pacts to help us avoid distraction. And so what we can do is to use technology. It's one form of a pact that we can make. There's many others I describe in the book as well. But let me give you a word of warning. The word of warning here is two things. Number one, this comes last, okay? Don't jump to using this technique. It only works, and it will backfire if you haven't done the other three steps first. First, mastering the internal triggers, making time for traction, hacking back the external triggers. Only last do you want to use this technique of making a pre-commitment, using these pacts. The other word of warning is that some people, when they find themselves falling off track, when they fail on the road to becoming indistractable, look, all of us get distracted from time to time. It's about what you do the next time you get distracted, right? Do you learn from that experience and get better over time? Some people can't get back on the horse. They get distracted the first time and they say, oh, there's something wrong with me. I have a short attention span. I must need a pill. I must need something to fix this. And they give up. The solution to this is actually quite simple. The solution, it turns out, is what we call self-compassion. Turns out that people who are more self-compassionate are much more likely to achieve their long-term goals. How do we cultivate self-compassion? It's quite simple. We simply talk to ourselves the way we would talk to a good friend. For example, if I told you what happened with my daughter, about how I got distracted when I was with my daughter and I took my attention off of being with someone I really love and wanted to spend time with and give her my full attention, instead I was checking my device. If you were my good friend and I told you this, would you tell me that I'm a horrible person, that I'm a terrible father? Not if you were my good friend, you wouldn't. And yet that's the kind of stuff I would tell myself. Many of us have this dialogue with ourselves where we bully ourselves. We're not self-compassionate. We're the opposite. And it's not helpful and it's not true. And here's what else isn't true. This idea that technology is hijacking our brains, that it's addicting everyone, that there's nothing we can do about it because it's too powerful. That's rubbish. There is so much we can do to make sure that we become indistractable. We just talked about these 4 basic steps of mastering the internal triggers, making time for traction, hacking back external triggers, and preventing distraction with pacts. So there's a lot more in the book that I didn't get to cover today. There's a lot of techniques, but I wanted to give you just a high-level overview. I hope you'll check out the book as well when you have a chance. But the key message I want to leave with you today is that we can do this. We are much more powerful than these technologies. The key here is to realize that we can get the best out of these tools without letting them get the best of us. We can all become indistractable. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd love to ask you for a quick favor. If you'd be so kind as to go to this URL, opinion2.us. Notice it's not .com, it's opinion2.us. Or if you have an iPhone, you can simply point your camera at that QR code and it'll take you straight to this quick survey. I would love to know what you thought of the presentation. It's just a very quick survey, only five questions. Would love to know what you thought. And if you fill out that little survey, you'll get a link to the SlideShare presentation that you just saw. You can have all these slides, keep them, review them, share them with someone if you'd like. Would love to know what you thought. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time for questions. We have time for a few questions. If I don't get to your question, feel free to go to my website, nirandfar.com. It's there at the bottom. There's a little form that you can send me if you have any questions we didn't get to today. And with that, I would love to take some questions.
Awesome. Nir, thank you so much. Really appreciate the presentation. If we had more time, I would share so many thoughts and reactions. I love this. First, one thing I will
We can
say,
do a follow-up call.
I love this notion, and I think all of us would probably agree, of trying to pay attention to our feelings, to our emotions, and trying to manage that. I know Ray Dalio famously says, pain plus reflection equals progress, which it reminded me of. We'll dive right into questions. First in line with Shiva Menta. Shiva, do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Yep. Hey, I'm Shiva. I am a freshman at Northwestern University. I'm calling in from Burr Ridge, Illinois. And I guess the question that I had was around the idea of making time for traction. I've been trying to do a little bit of that block calendar that you suggested. And I guess I was just curious about how you balance, I guess, some of the things that you would consider distractions, such as checking your phone, playing video games, or anything like that. How you find time in your day and how you determine that balance between the work you have to get done and actually creating time for those distractions to make them more of tractions.
Yeah. So, unlike a lot of other tech commentators who tell you, oh, stop playing video games, stop using social media, all these academics who say that don't use social media. So it's really easy for them to say, stop using it. But you and I both know that in this age, if you don't use these technologies, many of us will get fired. It's not a luxury to not use email, to not use social media. Our livelihoods depend on using these technologies. And there's no reason to not use them. The idea here is to plan when you use these products in your day. So you're not using them to escape. You're not using them when you feel bored, when you feel uncertain, when you feel fearful. You're not checking them to escape the internal trigger. You're using them based on your values. Now, the way we do this is we sit with our calendar. Right now, I'll give you actually a link. Ross, maybe you can toss in this link. It's nirandfar.com/schedule-maker. Again, that's /schedule-maker. This is a free tool I built. Anyone can use it. You don't have to sign up for anything. No email addresses, nothing. Anyone can use it. All it is simply a calendar template, okay, for the next 7 days. Now, as opposed to, I think, what I think is misguided advice around Make a vision board. What are your 5-year plans? What's the regrets of the dying? How about we just start with next week? And what I want you to do is to think about how the person you want to become would spend their time. Okay? That's what values are. Values are attributes of the person we want to become. So what I want you to do is to simply look at the 7 days coming up and start with these 3 life domains. The 3 life domains are you, your relationships, and your work. Okay, so in the you domain, how much time would the person you want to become spend on whatever's important to you, right? Physical fitness, if taking care of your body is important. Do you have time in your day scheduled to exercise? Do you have a bedtime, right? Bedtime, as kids, our parents told us to have a bedtime. Bedtime, that's for good reason. We know that proper rest is incredibly important for our physical and psychological well-being. Do you have that scheduled in your calendar? Do you have time for meditation, for prayer, for video games even? If that helps you live according to your values, I want you to plan time for those fun activities that you need in that you domain. So that's the first thing I want you to do, is plan that time when you will do those things. Whether it's Facebook or YouTube or whatever it is that you find fun, plan that time in your day. Next, your relationships domain. How much time would the person you want to become spend interacting with their family, their friends, their siblings, their church group, community group, whatever it might be? How much time would that person spend? I want you to book that time. Don't just say on your to-do list, spend 2 hours talking to mom. No, put that time on your calendar and hold it forever, okay? That's the second domain. The third domain is your work, right? So whether that's schoolwork, whether that's work when you go off into the professional world, that's where I want you to distinguish between reactive work and reflective work. So how much time in your day would the person you want to become spend on email, for example? Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, sorry, it looked like, okay. Sorry. So how much time would that person spend on the reactive work of email and checking your phone, whatever it might be? Plan that time as well. And then most importantly, that reflective work. Where is that time for that focused work where you have time to concentrate, to plan ahead? Plan that time as well. So using those 3 life domains, that's a really good guide, starting with you, your relationships, and then finally your work. That's how we fill out the rest of the week. Now, the reason this is so effective is because it makes you make trade-offs. Right? It helps you consider, well, how much time, if I spend more time on email, that means less time in the gym or less time with my friends. That's fine. I want you to force yourself to make these kind of trade-offs as opposed to a to-do list. Oh, it's so easy. Just put on a to-do list and I feel productive, even though most of that stuff won't get done.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. By the way, if I could add just one quick thing. The other reason this is so effective, having a time box calendar, is that when you have a physical manifestation, when you can say, okay, here's my calendar, you see, here's what my week ahead, then you can share that calendar with others and you can synchronize your schedule. So when you go off to the working world, if you want to be the most favored employee, right? If you want your boss to love you, take 10 minutes a week and share your calendar with them. They won't ask you to do this because they don't want to micromanage you. But if you take 10 minutes and say, look, boss, here's my schedule for the week. Okay, here's what I plan to do to make sure I do the things that you asked me to do. Now, there's this other list of activities, of tasks you asked me to do that I couldn't figure out how to put in here, but can you help me reprioritize? Is there anything I should swap out between this list of things that I don't have time for and my calendar for the week ahead? Help me reprioritize. Why is this so effective? Because we've all heard this terrible advice. I hate this advice, that if you want to be better at focusing your attention, learn how to say no. That is the stupidest advice. You're telling me that I'm going to go to my boss, the person who cuts my check, and I'm going to tell them no? I'm going to get fired. That's terrible advice. So don't tell your boss no. Instead, have your boss be the person who says no. They'll be the person who says, you know what, that task that you have on your calendar right there, that's actually not as important, but this thing over there, that's really important. Let's swap those out. So making that time box calendar and sitting down with your boss for just 10 minutes a week and reviewing that calendar and saying, okay, am I doing the right stuff here? Does that work for you? They will worship the ground you walk on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shiva, for the question, and Nir for the really, really detailed answer. It's incredibly helpful. We're at 5:59. I know you have a hard stop. So clock strikes, we do want to say thank you. If everybody again wants to unmute your line and say thank you to Nir for his second Zoom virtual applause.
Thank you.
We have a couple of announcements we'll make, but Nir, thank you so much. We won't hold you up any longer. Really, really appreciated the
pleasure. Thank you. And sorry we didn't have too much time for questions. I wanted to give you as much information as I possibly could. But again, if there's anything that I didn't get to that you want to ask me about, feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Absolutely. And we'll follow up with everyone that was on this call with the link to your office hours.
All right. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Nir.
Thank you.
Everybody, if you have 30 more
Thank you.
seconds to stay on, we'll share a quick update. We're really, really excited to tell you who our next speaker is going to be. We are going to have next week, we are going to have F. Martin. F. Martin is a legend in finance. He was a senior partner at Goldman Sachs and was actually one of the co-founders of their technology and media investment banking group. F worked on the IPO of Microsoft with Bill Gates and a lot of tech icons that you know of today. F is incredibly wise, incredibly great speaker, and he's going to speak to us on the topic of servant leadership. That will be next Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific or 6 p.m. Eastern. So feel free to mark that on your calendar right now if you can make it. That's one you won't want to miss. Aside from that, we're going to also send a follow-up survey. If you don't mind taking that, we'd love your feedback. For students here, we want to hear what other subjects and topics you want us to do National Speaker Series on. And also for professionals and board members and advisors on this call, we'll also ask you for your feedback as well. To our students, you can get entered to win a $20 Amazon gift card for taking the survey, as always. So thank you everyone for coming. Hope you had a wonderful, wonderful time and found this really valuable. Hope you stay safe and stay healthy. And as scholars of finance, let's go out there and lead with character and integrity this week. Thanks.
Thank you, Ross.
Thanks, Ross.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Ross.